Okay, everybody, in the intro to psychology class, Dr. Towson coming to you live from my home very early in the morning on, Monday, January 23rd. It's raining and pouring around here, so your task, I'm going to give you basically 3 lectures here, and I've given you an agenda. It's under Module 1. And just go under Module 1 and you'll see that there are basically 3 different agendas there. Your task is to basically type out detailed outlines of each one of these lectures, adding information from the book. I grade it. It'll be worth 100 points. Graded excellent, good, basic, weak. And you basically have till February 5th at noon to post this, and you can send me drafts up to February 3rd, I think it's at 8 p.m. or so. The main criteria that I'm looking for in these write-ups are, did you get the main content down, especially for this first one, and the writing style. We're not looking for just notes and information, but we're looking for kind of a detailed outline approach where it looks systematic and it looks neat and it looks organized. So with that being said, let me get started on things. What is cognitive psychology? Well, cognitive psychology is the study of thinking, how we think and process information. And the 4 fields we often study in cognitive psychology, you can write this under your notes there, are problem solving, attention, language, and memory. And if you notice, I put the word palm over there. That's a good example of a mnemonic device. It's the first letter mnemonic. Problem solving, attention, language, and memory. These are the 4 fields of cognitive psychology. And basically what we talk about is there's a model out there. It's the Atkinson and Shiffrin model. It's somewhere there in Chapter 8 of your book. Let's see if we can find it in there. Chapter 8 of your book. I think it's at the very beginning of things. Let's see what we got. There it is. It looks like on page 273, the Atkinson and Shiffrin model of short-term memory, and one of the simple experiments we do. And if you wouldn't mind trying this, I would certainly appreciate it as a little demonstration. I'm going to read off 10 numbers for you. What I'd like you to do is listen to these 10 numbers, and then you just try to write down the numbers in sequence that I give you. If you do really poorly on this, don't worry about it, because it's just a demonstration. So here are the numbers. You need to have a sheet of paper and a pencil or pen to write it down. Are you ready? Okay, the numbers are 8, 1, 5, 3, 9, 5, 8, 2, 7, 2. Try to write all 10 of those numbers down in order if you can. After you've done that, you can stop the tape if you want to until you finish that. Let me tell you what the answers were, and you can see how many you got correct and in which positions. The first 3 numbers were 8, 1, 5, so check off if you got the 8, 1, 5 correct. People usually do pretty well on those numbers. The middle 3 numbers, 3, 9, 5, people don't usually do well on those middle 3 numbers. And then 8, 2, 7, 2, they usually get a little bit better at the end. What I ran for you, if you look on page 288 of your book, was the serial position experiment. This is called the serial position experiment, and we usually see, if you look on page, 289, the serial position effect. That usually, so that's, you know the method, so you want to write that down. You know the result. People usually do very well at the beginning of the list. That is called the primacy effect. Doing well at the beginning of the list, that's a result. People usually do very well at the end of the list. That's called the recency effect. And so that is the serial position experiment. The capacity of short-term memory. Usually people remember between 5 to 9 chunks of information. Why do we call it chunks? Well, let me give you an example of this. And I'm from the 80s, and if anybody remembers the song Jenny Jenny, 867530999, that would actually be 1 chunk. So that's 1 chunk of information. And in fact, this phone number, I used to live in Rockford, Illinois, was my phone number in Rockford, Illinois. And so for me, this is one chunk of information. So the capacity in short-term memory is 5 to 9 chunks of information. Now, sometimes the word chunks for intro students in psychology at a college, we used to use the word chunks to denote something a little different at the Ohio State University where I attended, which was chunks is what you were giving up to the porcelain god when you went out and drank too much on the first day of class in bars. You would be blowing chunks into the bathroom. So much for that. I hope you found that a little amusing. So the capacity is 5 to 9 chunks of information. The duration is 10 to 15 seconds. If stuff stays there and you don't work with it, it'll go away. It's based on the serial position experiment. The codes in short-term memory, or working memory as it's called, we usually have an acoustic code. A good example of that is the idea of an acoustic code. If you're asked to remember a phone number, you just keep repeating it over and over again. The other code that we seem to have was actually illustrated by kind of a famous experiment by a person named Koslin, K-O-S-S-L-Y-N, K-O-S-S-L-Y-N. He actually asked people to do something a little bit unique, and you need to go to the picture on page 274. And it was very interesting what he did in this experiment. He asked people to imagine an elephant standing next to a rabbit on one side, and then he would ask, turn the sheet over and ask, the rabbit has ears. And he would actually get the reaction time for that. So he would get the reaction time for that. And in another condition of the experiment, he would show a rabbit next to a fly. And when he showed the rabbit next to the fly, he would ask the same question, and reaction times were always much quicker with the rabbit next to a fly. And the reason he believed this is because the rabbit next to a fly, the rabbit is much bigger, and you can see the ears a lot more easily. This is given a special name, this type of analysis. It's using reaction time to come up with an analysis of the contents of the mind. So this is called a chrono, C-H-R-O-N-O, chrono, time, chronometric analysis. Chronometric. You're quicker with the rabbit and fly, and that tells you that we have a visual image in our mind. So hopefully that makes good sense for you. Let's see. Next we have a brief outline for long-term memory. Well, with short-term memory, there is a capacity and duration and limits. For long-term memory, there doesn't seem to be that. We do lose information in long-term memory. The most frequent way but it should all be there, but there are other reasons we lose it. And there are good ways to improve long-term memory. One of the most frequent ways people do for long-term memory is called maintenance rehearsal. In your book, that's stated as repetition. You say things over and over again. That's considered a very basic process, and the key term there is the basic process of repeating something over and over allows you to consolidate, an important word to have down, information from short-term to long-term memory. Now, there are more elaborative procedures that could be used as well. 277, the Bauer experiment is a perfect example of that. The Bauer experiment, hierarchies. If things are structured into categories like the Bauer experiment, then you'll be much easier able to learn that information. Mnemonic devices. The palm. If I said, what are the Great Lakes to you? You might not know it, but if I gave you the term homes, H-O-M-E-S, you might identify homes, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. That's an output cue, and so that would actually give you a useful mnemonic device. Every good boy does fine is another one for scales. There are all sorts of mnemonics out there. Finally, the last one is the most powerful one. It's actually one that you create yourself. So let me actually share with you a little personal mnemonic that I did many years ago. I was asked to memorize a verse from a very famous passage in a very famous play. So let me share what that is with you here. So, with that being stated, here we go. So just listen to this, try not to giggle too much, and see what you can come up with. Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt. fall or resolve itself into a do, or that the everlasting had not fixed his cannon against self-slaughter. Oh God, God, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Not 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2. So excellent a king that was to this Hyperion to a satyr, so loving to my mother that he might not between the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Must I remember why? So, did you recognize that? I love going up to the Mary Baldwin College Shakespeare Playhouse. That was the second soliloquy in the Hamlet tragedy where he's contemplating suicide. So I memorized that back in 1984 when I was asked to do that at The Ohio State University. The question is, how was I able to do that so well? I used subjective organization, came out with my own ways of doing things. Did you hear the tapping going on? I used to play the drums, so I made it very individualistic. Did you pick up on that I was kind of doing some songs there? The first one was actually kind of a jazz version of the Itsy Bitsy Spider. The Itsy Bitsy Spider, oh, how this solid. So I had a song to that, and the second one was Three Blind Mice. Not 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2. So I did my own organizational technique. I practiced it a gazillion times. I bragged to all my friends in the 80s at Ohio State, and therefore I was able to put it into long-term memory. So subjective organization is perhaps the most powerful technique to use. There's also distributed practice that you can use, where you space things out over time and don't try to cram. Your book also talks about, if you want to add some material on state-dependent learning, they did a famous experiment where they had people learn and remember information underwater, and then when they tested them underwater, they were able to recall them. So if you're in that physical state, sometimes that happens with mental states and alcoholic states as well. 287 describes that, so we got that one. And then recall deficits. How come things don't work very well sometimes? Well, one of the reasons things don't work very well is something called retroactive interference. And a good example of that is test taking. If you're asked to take a test, you learn something at point in time A, and then all this new information comes in, and you can't recall that information. The Shakespeare soliloquy I was able to memorize because it was unique and different, wasn't subject to that. It's 30 years later, and I'm still remembering the soliloquy. I had to remember a Macbeth soliloquy, and I just did maintenance rehearsal for that, and so that was gone. So retroactive interference. Proactive interference is the idea that when you learn old information, it sometimes interferes with learning new information. So if you've ever had to learn an old language and then learn a new one, that's proactive interference. You can't learn the new one because of the old one. Lack of the output cue. We talked about the Great Lakes. Sometimes you don't have it. Lack of input organization. If things come in as garbage, if you don't understand it, if you have a teacher that just presents random information and it's garbage coming in, then you won't be able to recall. And then lack of processing. There's a view that's put forth in your book if you want to add it. Levels of processing. I forget where that one is, but it's in there somewhere if you want to go and find it. Levels of processing basically says, let's see if I can, there it is on 278. The idea is if you can process it in a more meaningful way, deep processing, then you'll add more information on. So hopefully you can add that in for levels of processing. Okay, one more thing to cover here, I think. Very famous experiment, if you want to watch it on the YouTube video. It was a Loftus and Palmer experiment. Very simple experiment. They showed people in different conditions a car accident. And in the car accident, after they showed them the car accident, they asked the people after how fast were the cars going when they, and then they manipulated the words. Some people saw the word bumped, some people saw the word smashed, some people crashed, and they basically found that if memory was really accurate, they all saw the same scene. They should have actually answered that in the same way. They should have said the same speed. But it turns out that when the people had the word made contact as an example, that their speed estimates were actually very lower, and when they had the word smashed, their speed estimates were very higher. And then 2 weeks later, everybody was asked, was there glass at the scene? And they actually found that the truth is there weren't. But they found that the people who said, had the question, was there glass at the scene, when they used the word smashed, many more of them said yes to that. So it's as if the meaning of this is that false memories were actually created from this. People actually created false memories from this, and this is actually very much applied in eyewitness memory to the idea of potential police work. If police ask you to identify things, many times you don't get a good view of things, so you could have, depending on their questions, you could remember things differently. Lawyers can certainly use this in asking questions. How fast were the cars going when they smashed? And then even clinical psychologists have to be careful with this, because if you ask somebody the wrong questions in the wrong way, that could actually get people to conjure up false memories of abuse from childhood that aren't actually true. So what I'd like you to do for the final assignment here is go into the website on false memory syndrome, summarize it the best you can, and give your critical evaluation of it. You have till February 5th to do this. Send me a draft of this, which is basically an email with an attached file, and I'll give you my critiques. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.